Behind every famous invention, every breakthrough that changed humanity, there's often a shadow, someone erased from history, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. Today we uncover three forgotten geniuses whose work you use every day, yet their names were deliberately buried. The truth is shocking. London, 1843. Gas lamps flicker in the fog-choked streets. The Industrial Revolution roars through England, reshaping the world with steam and iron. In a modest study, a young woman sits surrounded by papers covered in mathematical notations, so complex, so far ahead of their time, that no one alive can truly understand what she's created. Her name is Ada Lovelace, and she has just written the world's first computer program. There's only one problem. Computers won't exist for another 100 years. Ada was born into scandal and genius. Her father was Lord Byron, the infamous poet who abandoned her as an infant. Her mother, terrified that Ada would inherit his wild, artistic temperament, raised her on mathematics and logic instead. But Ada possessed something rare. She had her father's imagination fused with her mother's precision. She didn't just see numbers, she saw music and mathematics, poetry and algorithms. She called it poetical science, and it would change everything. In 1833, at 17, Ada met Charles Babbage, a brilliant but difficult inventor, obsessed with building a machine he called the analytical engine. It was meant to be a calculating device, nothing more. A mechanical monster of gears and levers, designed to crunch numbers faster than any human could. Babbage saw it as a glorified calculator. But Ada saw something he couldn't. She saw the future. For years, she worked alongside Babbage, but her contributions were dismissed. She was translating an Italian mathematician's paper about the analytical engine when she added her own notes, notes that would eventually be 3 times longer than the original document. In those notes, she described something extraordinary. She realized that if the machine could manipulate numbers, it could manipulate anything that could be assigned numbers, symbols, letters, even music. She wrote the first algorithm, a step-by-step set of instructions for the machine to calculate Bernoulli numbers. It was the world's first computer program. But Ada went further. In her notes, she predicted that such machines could one day create music, produce graphics, and become useful to science in ways no one had imagined. She foresaw artificial intelligence. She foresaw the digital age. She saw computers when the world still traveled by horse and carriage, and the world ignored her. Charles Babbage became known as the father of computing. His name filled the textbooks. Ada's work was labeled as mere translations, her notes dismissed as footnotes to a man's genius. Some scholars even suggested Babbage had written them for her, that she was simply his secretary, putting his thoughts to paper. The idea that a woman, especially a young woman in Victorian England, could conceive of something so revolutionary was simply unacceptable. Ada knew she had discovered something profound. In her letters, she wrote with a strange mixture of confidence and desperation, as if she understood that the world wasn't ready for her yet. She pushed herself relentlessly, often working through illness and pain. She struggled with her health for years, and in 1852, at just 36 years old, Ada Lovelace died of uterine cancer. She died believing her work would be forgotten, another woman's voice lost to history's silence. And for a century, she was right. It wasn't until 1953, more than 100 years after her death, that her notes were rediscovered and properly analyzed. Researchers realized what they were looking at, the blueprint for modern computing. Ada hadn't just assisted Babbage, she had surpassed him entirely. She had seen what the machine could become, and she had written the instructions for a future she would never see. Today, every line of code, every app on your phone, every algorithm that runs your life traces back to Ada's vision. In 1980, the U.S. Department of Defense finally named a programming language after her, Ada. It took 140 years for history to say her name, 140 years for the world to admit that a woman had programmed the future while men were still trying to build the present. But the question remains, how many other brilliant minds were buried simply because they were born into the wrong body, the wrong century, the wrong moment in time? America, 1877. The Civil War has ended, but the scars remain. In the South, former slaves navigate a world that has supposedly set them free, but refuses to treat them as equals. In Paris, Kentucky, a boy is born to parents who had been enslaved. His name is Garrett Augustus Morgan, and he will grow up to invent technology that saves millions of lives. But America will do everything in its power to erase him from history. Garrett had only an elementary education, 6 years of schooling before he had to work to support his family. But what he lacked in formal training, he made up for in brilliance and determination. He moved to Cleveland, Ohio, as a teenager, and taught himself mechanics, engineering, and invention. By his 20s, he had opened his own sewing machine repair business. He was talented, ambitious, and about to change the world. In 1914, Garrett Morgan invented the safety hood, what we now know as the gas mask. It was a simple but ingenious device, a hood with tubes that extended down to the ground, allowing the wearer to breathe clean air beneath the toxic smoke and fumes that rose upward. He knew it could save lives in fires, industrial accidents, and disasters. But there was a problem. Garrett Morgan was a black man in America, and America wasn't ready to accept that a black man could be a genius. When he tried to market his invention, he faced immediate resistance. So Morgan did something extraordinary. He hired a white actor to pose as the inventor, while he himself posed as the actor's assistant, a full-blooded Indian named Big Chief Mason. It was humiliating, degrading, but it worked. Orders poured in. Fire departments across the country bought his safety hoods. His invention was saving lives. Then came July 24th, 1916. A tunnel being dug beneath Lake Erie in Cleveland suffered a catastrophic explosion. 32 workers were trapped underground, surrounded by smoke, dust, and toxic gas. The rescue teams couldn't reach them. Anyone who descended into that tunnel would die within minutes from the poisonous fumes. Garrett Morgan grabbed his safety hoods, rushed to the scene with his brother Frank, and descended into hell itself. Twice they went down into that black, toxic darkness. Twice they emerged carrying unconscious men. By the end of the night, they had saved multiple lives and recovered bodies so families could bury their dead. The newspapers called Garrett Morgan a hero. Cleveland celebrated him, until they realized he was black. Orders for his safety hoods were canceled across the southern states. Fire departments that had praised his invention sent them back. His heroism was erased from newspaper records. The white actor was given credit for the invention instead. Garrett Morgan had risked his life to save others, and America thanked him by trying to erase his name from history. But Morgan wasn't finished. In 1923, after witnessing a terrible car accident at an intersection, he invented something else the world desperately needed: the three-position traffic signal. Before Morgan, traffic signals only had two positions: stop and go. Drivers had no warning before the light changed, causing constant collisions. Morgan added the yellow light, the transitional signal that gave drivers time to slow down safely. It was brilliant in its simplicity, and it would become the standard for every traffic light on Earth. He patented his invention and tried to manufacture it himself, but he lacked the capital. Large corporations circled like vultures. General Electric bought his patent for $40,000, a sum that seemed generous, but was a fraction of what the invention was truly worth. They made millions. Garrett Morgan's name disappeared from the story. Meanwhile, his gas mask was being used in the trenches of World War I, saving soldiers from mustard gas and chlorine attacks. Firefighters around the world used his design. Every day, his inventions saved lives, and almost no one knew his name. Garrett Morgan died in 1963, the same year Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. He had lived to see the civil rights movement begin, but he never saw himself receive proper credit for his genius. It would take decades more for historians to uncover his patents, his contributions, his heroism. Today, his story is taught in some schools. His name appears in some history books. But for how long was it hidden? How many generations never knew that a black man invented the technology they depended on every single day? And here's the haunting question. How many others like Garrett Morgan were there? How many brilliant black inventors, scientists, and creators were erased so thoroughly that we don't even know enough to search for them? London, 1951. The race is on to unlock the secret of life itself. Scientists around the world are obsessed with DNA, the mysterious molecule that holds the blueprint for every living thing. Whoever discovers its structure will change biology forever. In a laboratory at King's College, a woman works alone in near darkness, her eyes trained on X-ray diffraction patterns that dance across her photographic plates. Her name is Rosalind Franklin, and she's about to take the photograph that will reveal the structure of DNA. She has no idea that her colleagues are about to steal it. Rosalind was a chemist and an expert in X-ray crystallography, a technique that uses X-rays to photograph molecular structures. It required precision, patience, and genius. Rosalind had all three. She had spent months perfecting her technique, adjusting her equipment, working with DNA samples that were notoriously difficult to photograph. Most scientists couldn't get clear images. Rosalind's were perfect. In May 1952, she captured it. Photo 51. The image showed an unmistakable X shape, the signature of a helical structure. It was the clearest picture of DNA anyone had ever seen, and it proved what Rosalind had suspected. DNA was a double helix. She had the evidence. She had the data. She was on the verge of the greatest discovery in the history of biology. But Rosalind worked in a hostile environment. King's College in the 1950s was not kind to women in science. She was excluded from the faculty lunchroom because women weren't allowed. Her colleague, Maurice Wilkins, treated her as an assistant rather than an equal, despite the fact that she was the superior scientist. She was isolated, underestimated, and about to be betrayed. Without her knowledge or permission, Maurice Wilkins showed Photo 51 to two other scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick. They were working at Cambridge, desperately trying to build a model of DNA's structure. But they lacked the crucial data. When Watson saw Rosalind's photograph, everything clicked into place. Years later, he would write in his memoir that seeing Photo 51 was the moment he knew they would win the race. Using Rosalind's data, her photograph, her measurements, her years of painstaking work, Watson and Crick built their model. In 1953, they published their paper describing the double helix structure of DNA. It made them famous overnight. Rosalind Franklin's name appeared nowhere in their paper. She was mentioned only in a vague acknowledgement, buried in the text, as if her contribution were minor. Rosalind never fought back. Perhaps she didn't realize the full extent of the theft. Perhaps she was too focused on her work to care about credit. She continued her research, moving on to study viruses, where she made more groundbreaking discoveries. But her health was failing. Years of exposure to X-rays without proper protection had taken their toll. In 1958, at the age of 37, Rosalind Franklin died of ovarian cancer. She died not knowing that Watson and Crick had built their entire discovery on her stolen work. She died believing she had simply been too slow, that she had lost the race. 4 years later, in 1962, James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering the structure of DNA. In their acceptance speeches, they barely mentioned Rosalind Franklin. Watson later described her in his memoir as difficult, unattractive, and hostile. He reduced her to a stereotype, a bitter woman who couldn't see her own data clearly. He rewrote history to make himself the hero and her the obstacle he had to overcome. But the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Scientists who had worked with Rosalind began to speak out. Her colleagues published papers detailing her contributions. Watson's own memoir, meant to glorify himself, accidentally revealed the theft. He admitted they had used her data without her permission. The scientific community slowly began to realize what had happened. Rosalind Franklin had been robbed. Today, her name is spoken with reverence. Universities bear her name. Institutes are dedicated to her memory. Every DNA test, every genetic breakthrough, every advancement in molecular biology is built on her work. But here's the cruel irony. Nobel Prizes are not awarded posthumously. The rules of history itself prevented her from ever receiving the recognition she deserved. Rosalind Franklin discovered the structure of life, and two men stole it, won the world's most prestigious prize, and let her die in obscurity. That is the truth. That is what happened. Three geniuses, three different eras, one common thread running through all their stories, like a dark current beneath the surface of history. Ada Lovelace saw the future of computing and wrote the world's first program, but history called her a translator and gave the credit to men. Garrett Morgan invented technology that saves millions of lives every single day, but racism erased his name from the inventions he created. Rosalind Franklin unlocked the secret of life itself, and her male colleagues stole her work, won the Nobel Prize, and never looked back. These weren't accidents. This wasn't bad luck. This was systematic erasure. Women, minorities, anyone who didn't fit the narrow definition of what a genius was supposed to look like. They were written out of history, their contributions stolen or buried, their names replaced with more acceptable ones. And the cost wasn't just to them. It was to all of us. How many children grew up never seeing someone who looked like them in the history books? How many brilliant minds were discouraged from science, from invention, from changing the world because they were taught that people like them didn't do such things? How many Adas, Garretts, and Rosalinds existed whose names we don't even know to search for? Every time you type on a computer, you're using Ada Lovelace's vision. Every time you stop at a yellow light, you're being protected by Garrett Morgan's genius. Every time you benefit from genetic medicine, DNA testing, or molecular biology, you're standing on Rosalind Franklin's stolen work. We use their inventions every single day. The least we can do, the very least, is remember their names. History isn't just written by the victors. It's written by those who control the narrative, those who decide which names get carved into stone and which get left in the dust. For too long, the narrative excluded anyone who didn't fit a certain image. For too long, we accepted that image without question. But we don't have to anymore. These three names, Ada Lovelace, Garrett Morgan, Rosalind Franklin, deserve to be remembered. Share this video so their stories reach everyone who uses a computer, drives through an intersection, or benefits from genetic science. If this made you angry, inspired, or moved, smash that like button. Subscribe because we're uncovering more forgotten geniuses in our next video. There are more stories buried in history, more names that deserve to be spoken, and we're going to find them. Drop a comment. Which story shocked you most? And who else do you think history forgot? Let's build a list together. Let's drag these names out of the shadows and into the light where they belong. They changed the world. Now it's time we change history.